doing today?
We're doing great. How are you?
Keeping busy, that's for sure.
Cool.
All good this side of the border.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Spring is here. Spring has sprung.
I just want to talk about how pretty the quilt is behind Tracy's head.
I know. I was going to say something earlier.
Has that been distracting anyone other than me?
It is beautiful.
That's the sample for my online class. That's the full sample. There's 12 blocks up there. Yeah.
It's gorgeous.
Thank you.
I love the colors.
Yeah, but the quilting is gorgeous.
I never
the colors are pretty.
I've never really totally warmed up to the colors. I love the quilting, but it's an online class. So yeah.
Is it still available online, Tracy?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
So you guys need to go find her online class too. Tracy needs to make sure she puts that in the description on her post for YouTube. This. That looks gorgeous.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. I had this a few years ago. It was a block of the month thing that I did, but it had nothing to do with the piecing. It was block of the month quilting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I turned it into a class that gives you a minimum of 3. I say 3, but you know me. Or you can add a curl to this, or you can put this here, or do this instead, or whatever. It never ends. But it's basically 3 different ways to quilt 12 different blocks. So some of my students have done the full quilt. Some of my students have done 3 quilts, a modern one, a traditional one, and a freestyle one. And I just see those as the difference in the fabrics, like the feel that the fabrics give you. And so they can choose whether they take the entire class and get all of it, or they can choose just the traditional version, or just the freestyle version, or just the modern version. So yeah, it's been up there for a couple of years now, but people still sign up. And it's one of those classes where you don't lose access. So you don't have to do it in a time frame. I had a lady sign up for it yesterday when she was here for the day with her new owner's class. And she goes, "Oh, never mind. Now I'll just take the whole thing." She goes, I don't know which genre I'm going to like best, so I'll just buy the whole thing. I said, well, it makes sense because there's lots there, right?
Especially if you're a new longarmer, it's perfect.
Yeah, there's 45 videos that come with the full version, and the book that you would print out with the downloads is like about that thick. Wow. It's a huge class.
I haven't seen the class, but I've seen the handout. The handout's fabulous.
Thank you. Yeah. So anyway, that's that quilt.
It's pretty.
Yes. All right. Let's talk today about things that longarmer requires, why, and to build that relationship with your longarmer if you are a quilt by check person. Okay. Sound good?
Sound good.
Absolutely.
All right. The first kind of thing we want to talk about is invest in your quilting education. What do you guys think?
What do you mean by that, Kathy?
Well, let's say I love watching our beginning boot camp class here, and even people who have taken beginning quilting classes at other stores. They learn something new from every teacher. And we've even had the same class taught by 2 different teachers, and people take it again because you learn different tips and tricks from the different educators.
Right. And you're referring to piecing at this point, right?
Yep, that's right.
Carry on.
What do you guys think?
So, yeah, investing in your education is important, even if you're watching YouTube videos or there's books you can read on quilting too. Learning how to press your seams and, square up your blocks and putting your borders on correctly. They're all important, and it's going to give you a better finished product in the end. It's going to make the longarmer's job easier, and you're going to get a quilt that looks better in the end. So, yeah.
I will say I'm a lurker on Facebook in a lot of groups. Mm-hmm. And I love that sometimes some of the hints that come across my feed are fabulous.
Lots of different ways to learn. Yeah. Classes are good though, because they're now that we're allowed out now, it's good. It's a social thing. Even if you don't need to take piecing classes. It's still an appointment to sew,
Mhm.
and then you will still meet other people. And it doesn't matter how experienced you are, as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. You're always going to learn something, even if it's just one little nugget from a class or a different teacher or whatever. So just be a sponge.
And it's okay if that nugget is, I don't want to do this method. That's valid, because that's how I feel about paper piecing. I can paper piece. I don't enjoy paper piecing. So, but I've taken a lot of classes on it so that I can do it if it's a technique I need to do for something.
And I also think classes offer an opportunity for you to meet other people, to maybe find your core group of quilters that you want to hang out with and have fun with.
Mm-hmm. I have to giggle about the paper piecing thing, Angela, because I've paper pieced twice. And the second time was to confirm or not confirm that I truly did dislike it as much as I thought I did. And I truly dislike it as much as I thought I did.
I do dislike it a whole lot. And there's been a couple times I've had to use it for like classes that I wanted to teach how to put a design into a specific designer's patterns, and that designer's only paper piecing. So I know I can do it, and I do it well. But yeah, my first class on paper piecing kind of turned me off on paper piecing too. So yeah.
And I love those quilts. I'm not saying I don't like paper pieced quilts. I don't like physically paper piecing.
Yeah, that's one I would actually, if somebody does that for a living and paper pieces quilts, I would consider paying you to do it for me, because I just don't enjoy it.
Well, I feel like there's a love-hate relationship with whatever's out there. Some people love applique, some people don't like applique, some people love to bind, most people hate to bind. I mean, there's always going to be that like love-hate relationship.
Yeah.
Kind of with different techniques. I think that we get to make fun of ourselves, and what we don't like is what's the fun part, actually.
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that both Tracy and I had the same thing. Paper piecing. We don't like paper piecing. Yeah.
Paper piecing.
Yeah, just not my thing. But I mean, that's okay. It's okay to learn that something isn't your thing. And it's okay to say, I like those quotes, but I'm not willing to invest that time. Right. So getting that education is important for you as a piecer. For us, it's important that you get it so that you're pressing your seams correctly, like, and doing little things. You're going to learn little tips as you're taking classes. And those tips become really important to the end product that you are producing, and, what we can do for you.
Right. Speaking of pressing, good lead in there, dear. Oh. Pressing matters.
Yes. It matters so much. It does. And here's one of the reasons that paper piecing is not for me. When you paper piece, you have no control over how something is pressed. And as a long arm quilter, if you want me to, stitch in the ditch around a background, I want the background to, typically backgrounds are the lighter fabric, not always, but I want you to press away from that fabric, so towards the dark. So I can keep my stitch in the ditch on the same side of the ditch all the way around, like a spike, let's say. When you're paper piecing, you can't do that, because, the opposite side of the spike is going to be pressed the opposite way. So it can be really hard to do a really good job stitching in the ditch on a paper pieced project. So that's the other side of paper piecing that I'm not a fan of. So yeah, really accurate piecing, harder to long arm. So, yeah.
Yes, more patience. I feel as a long armor, things that make my skin crawl is just stitch in the ditch for me.
Yeah. The easiest thing on a domestic machine is the absolute hardest thing on a long arm.
The most time
consuming.
It's time consuming, but even building your skills, right? So
you
didn't start out, your first day on your long arm being able to use a ruler and stitch in the ditch, right? Whereas pretty much my first day on a domestic machine, I could stitch in the ditch, right? Once I learned how to sandwich the quilt correctly, stitching in the ditch was easy on my domestic machine. that's not the case on a long arm. It takes us, not, I don't want to say years, but it takes us a long time of practicing to get really good with our rulers. And I did a lot of ruler work before I stitched in the ditch, right? Because for on a customer quilt anyways, right? I would be stitching in the ditch on my own quilt going, nobody's going to like that. Right. So yeah.
Well, right. And the time consuming. And if you did want to, like, for somebody who quilts by check, if you did want to quote, save some time for somebody potentially, is you could, I kind of encourage people to stitch in the ditch on their domestic machine. So.
Right. And you can stitch in the ditch after it's quilted, which is one of the ways that I have some customers who don't want to pay as much for my custom quilting. I do charge more if I stitch in the ditch because it took me the longest to learn. So it's my most expensive thing that I do. Right. So I have some customers that I will quilt the, pretty part of the design, and then they will go back with their domestic machine and do the stitch in the ditch. So they just need to have this, a thread that's applicable to do that with. So a lot of times I give them my extra bobbins, which I can do because I have a machine. My long arm has an L machine, or has an L bobbin, right? If I had an M bobbin, they wouldn't be able to use that bobbin without rewinding it. So, but I'll hand them my L bobbins and that I used on their machine that are left over so that they can use the same thread if they want to.
What a great tip right there to help people save some money on their quilting by check.
Yeah. Now, not all longarmers are going to be willing to do that. So that's the other side of it as well.
Right.
Because it's based on their method. Some people stitch in the ditch before they do the fancy quilting, and some people stitch in the ditch after they do the fancy quilting. So it's going to depend on that longarmer's method. I do whatever I feel like doing at that moment. I'm kind of a laid back quilter, surprisingly. Yeah.
I always joke in our store, I don't know about you guys, but no quilting police are allowed in. So if you want to press, we highly encourage to press towards the dark. But if you want to press open or towards the light, just don't expect miracles. But, that's fine. I'll tell you why it's good to use a 1/4 of an inch foot. But if you want to do something different, go for it.
I don't know. Pressing towards the dark if you're doing custom quilting is important, though.
Tracy, this next one I think will be for you. This one is, I think, a really great one. Cleaning up the back of the quilt is not always necessary.
Not always, no. It is very important if you've got a quilt that's got a white background or a lot of light fabrics in the top, whether they be background or just part of the quilt, mixed in with darker fabrics or brighter fabrics. If you can, press to the dark, press to the dark. If you can't, you really do need to take the time to clean up all those threads because they will shadow through. If you've got, say, red and white pieced together and you've pressed towards the white, you, no matter what, are going to see the shadow from the red or the blue or the black through the white, but you're also going to see those little tiny threads that fray. I have a cool little crochet hook that'll get out like your random stray threads, but that's not the same as seeing the shadowing everywhere. So always try to do that. Any regular quilt that's medium value, dark value, all your colors, if you can't see through it, I mean, unless it's as hairy as a grizzly bear's back, you really don't need to trim all those threads. But definitely with light colored backgrounds. Light and white.
You make it hard to not laugh out loud.
What did I say? As hairy
as a grizzly bear's back. Yeah, that was perfect. It was the perfect analogy.
It is a perfect analogy, but that took all of my ounce of control, and I'm not exhausted like the last time we did a podcast where I broke out laughing. A little bit more controlled on my end.
Yeah. Just, read the room. If you can't see all those fuzzy threads, then don't worry about them. We'll just quilt them in. It'll be all good.
Yeah. They're going to stay where they are. It's going to be fine.
Yeah. Once they're encased in the layers, they're fine. But you do want to watch if you've got white or light fabrics on top.
Right.
Okay.
Next.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, that's also something to talk about. We can talk about when we talk about backing here in just a second. On the having a dark back and a light front, that's another thing to understand that's going to happen. That's not the long armer's responsibility if the dark color starts showing through on the white fabric on the front.
And you can have like a patterned fabric on the back that has, let's say you're using Dalmatian print that has really big black spots on the back, and all of a sudden see those through if you have white matting and white on the front of your quilt. So it's something to keep in mind if you're doing a black and white quilt and you want this Dalmatian quilt on the back, you may be able to see that in places you're not anticipating.
Right.
Yeah. It's not going to make the quilt not usable though.
Oh, sure. And if that's what you want ultimately and you're fine with that, that's fine. You just need to know what's happening sometimes, and it's good to have that, I think, conversation with your long armor on, one of the best experiences I think I've had is a customer here who doesn't necessarily quilt often, did not want a specific color on the quilt. And they kind of set me up a little bit and asked me what color thread would I use on this quilt, because one lady was a quilter and one was not. And the lady who is a quilter was really trying to help the lady who is not understand things. And so they came in asking me all these questions and I didn't know it was a quiz. And I said something about, well, I'd use gray on that. And she goes, well, yuck, why would you do that? And I'm like, well, because there's gray and it was a grunge white that had a little tinge of gray in it, and then red and white and blue, kind of thing. I'm like, because of this right here. And then, once I explained it, everything was fine. And it was a good conversation. And I'm glad we had the conversation. But sometimes it's good to know your long armor, where they're coming from on their thread colors, on their choices of pantographs, different things like that. You guys agree?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of high contrast tops and backs. I'm not. I am
not either.
No, I like to go. It doesn't necessarily even have to be the perfect color. I think more in value. Right? So I've got a light quilt top. I want a light to medium backing fabric. And, I don't want a white top and a black back. And I know that's completely, that's the biggest value contrast, but just, stick with light to light, light to medium, and dark to dark medium kind of thing, and just keep them balanced, and you'll be happier with your project.
Yeah, I do the same thing with my thread, Tracy. So yeah.
And then our next thing we were talking about is getting to know your long armor's requirements.
I have a feeling that if you ask all three of us our requirements, you'd get 3 different answers, right? So you need to know the specific long armor you want to use, what they need you to do for them, like how much extra backing they need. I'm pretty sure that what I asked for, what Kathy asked for, and what Tracy asked for are going to be different, mostly because we load differently. We use different loading systems, right? So I can get away with, 2 to 3 inches on all 4 sides of my quilt. I ask for 3 to 4 inches, but if it's 2 inches, I can still get it. I can actually do a little bit less than that. But I'm going to ask you to make it bigger because it makes my job easier, right? You've got to get that backing to roll around rollers. We have clamps we have to put on the sides. So it does have to be bigger than your quilt top.
Perfect.
I asked
not that word.
Inches. I want 10 inches longer and wider. I use red snappers. Back in the day when I used to use pins, I could get the top of the quilt and the machine to within that far of the leader with the pins. You can't do that with clamps. So for those of us who are asking you for that, it's not because we want to waste your fabric. It's to make sure everything is loaded properly. And I like 5 inches, 4 minimum down the sides because of the clamps and because I need somewhere maybe to check tension, and we need room for those things. And when I trim up to give back to my customers, they get every shred of extra goes in their bag of their backing and their batting. So nothing goes in the garbage. I give it all back to them.
Well, and that's a good point. You just said when you trim for customers. So do you trim every quilt for customers?
I do. I trim. I leave between 1/2 inch to 1 inch outside the edge of the border. And I just trim it up so that when they get it back, it's just nicer to get it back like that, where it's not squared, it's trimmed. And I never ever trim right to a customer's border, because I don't ever want a situation to arise where someone thinks that I've cut their border.
Yeah.
It's not my job. It's not my job to do the final squaring up. So I just leave them that much batting so that they know I didn't touch the quilt top, and I fold it all nice and put it all in a bag.
So we don't trim quilts when we give them back.
Same.
That's just a decision that I made. Now, I will if the customer asks me to, because I have the equipment to do it and the space to do it. But I don't on every quilt. So I have some customers that will always ask us to trim, and others that have never asked us to. So yeah, it's kind of weird because you've got this like weird floppy thing going in multiple, and sometimes these backings are way bigger than the tops, right? But we've just never quilted, or we've never trimmed them. So yeah.
I'm not using rulers and rotary cutters to trim them up because I'm not squaring. I just use my big batting scissors, and I just cut it just so it's cleaner and tidier to hand it back. That's all. Yeah.
If I'm shipping a quilt, I ask them if they want it trimmed, so it would cut down on the shipping costs, and if they don't want the extra fabric.
Yeah, me too when I'm shipping. And the other thing is that we do our test right on the backing, because your backing may be different than my practice cloth. And I want to make sure my tension is balanced on your quilt. So you're going to have test strips going down at least one side of the quilt, possibly both sides of the quilt, depending on where we were when we were testing. So don't expect that extra material to come back pristine, because we've told you we need it. We're not, we're using it for your quilt still. So yeah. And that's something that if there isn't a test strip on it, and my staff thinks it's hilarious, if there isn't a test strip on it, I will typically get an email or a call from the client. So, and then I go, so-and-so's quilt, why was there not a test strip on that? And then they go, oh, well, yeah, she had two quilts. We loaded them in tandem. So the test strip was on the quilt above it, same backing. And I'm like, so, okay, customer called you on it. Customer called, right? So, yeah. So, yeah.
Well, and also too with like, I try to educate, because we have a bunch of wide backs here at our store. I have a gazillion wide backs because I have the long arm rental program. Plus, I like wide backs, and they're kind of my thing. But I like telling everybody the economical prices of wide backs compared to 45 wide. So wide backs are typically 108, 118, but obviously in cuddle they're 90 inches or 60 inches. But I don't run across hardly any 90-inch. People come in and ask me about 90-inch wide backing, and I have yet to see it I've seen it once, and it was the Australian fabric, and that was it.
I think, doesn't Kona offer theirs in 90? Yeah. So
I have a quilt here that I thought I was ordering 108, and it's 90 wide.
Yeah.
Are they just the solid colors? Okay, so that's what we're getting in. Okay, but I also tell people that we can, especially if your quilt is only like 80 inches long, you have all that extra that you could use for binding if you want, or scraps for another quilt. All right, the last but not least, I think, is going to be, it's one that's dear to my heart. Don't rush your long armor. Things happen that are out of our control sometimes, for one thing. Life happens.
We're trying to give you a realistic time frame, and if you're so both ways, I am going to overestimate a little bit when I give you a time frame, because I want to make sure that I meet or exceed that goal, right? But there is not enough room in there for me to also constantly deal with phone calls, right? So yeah, you're slowing your quilting down if you're calling your long armor. It's one thing if they haven't met their deadline. It's another, or if it's like a week out from when they said they would get it to you, and you call them and say, hey, just want to know if we're still on track. Completely okay. But there have been times that I've had to tell people, it's going to be a year before you get this back. And they start calling me weekly. And at some point, my reaction becomes, okay, listen, I may not be the long armor for you because it is going to be 9 more months from now, right? And calling me is not making this process any quicker or easier on either one of us, right?
And what I mean by don't rush your long armor is we are also dependent on that machine. And if something happens to that machine that we are not subject, I mean, that we're subject to as well as the quilt is subject to, I want to make sure that the quilting is beautiful, everything's right. And if I'm custom quilting, I don't want to be in a rush, and I want to be in the right mind and in a happy place.
Well, right. But a lot of that is I build that into the time that I give them. Right.
Right.
So that's why sometimes it comes in and it's way before I told you it was going to be. And sometimes, unfortunately, they're a couple weeks late, right? Because I didn't anticipate my long arm breaking down, or hey, I didn't anticipate not being able to walk on my foot for 6 weeks this year, right? So things happen that cause us not to make a deadline. You would hope the long armor would then call you and say, so yeah, I've had to have surgery and I'm not able to move my long arm right now, right? I mean, I know the first time I had surgery after I had my long arm, I wasn't even allowed to push a shopping cart for 8 weeks. Right. So there was no way I was moving my long arm. I couldn't stand at my long arm. So I had abdominal surgery. So, it's a situation where your long armor is going to try very, very hard to make the deadline that they gave you. But you also need to try to respect that deadline. And I've had people recently come into me and say, I'm going to another state to give this quilt to somebody who is graduating from college. Okay, that's great. And then they share with me that I need to bring it in on Friday because the quilt's not done yet. And they want it to be able to go onto a flight on like Tuesday. And I'm like, yeah, I can't flip a quilt over a weekend. I have quilts in front of you that got them to me earlier, right? So it's a hard conversation we have to have with customers because we want to make you happy and we want to say, yes, we can do it, right? But you've got to build the time for the long armor to actually quilt the quilt into the time that you're, planning on piecing the quilt. Most long armors have, a couple weeks at a minimum for a turnaround. Some have months or even a year. Like I've already told you that I've given people a year. I've given people more than a year if it's custom quilting. So I have 2 schedules that we work. We work edge to edge quilting, and we can usually flip that in 2 to 3 weeks. If it is custom quilting, it's going to be at least a year.
And you're fortunate to have a staff to help you with the long arming like I am, but Tracy's all by herself. One of the lovely things that I like to be able to offer my Quilt by Check people is an opportunity, and all 3 of us have this beautiful opportunity to offer them to become their own long armers.
Yeah.
And don't you feel like watching your piecer come in and then become the long armor, how beautiful, and how you see those transformations all the way around in all of their quilting journey?
Yeah. Definitely see a transformation in their piecing journey. I became a bigger piecer. I became a better piecer when I became a long armor.
So did I.
Yeah.
So did I.
Well, it's just understanding the whys. It's not just like, I love my grandson is why. He's 3. Why? Well, and I think if we educate people with the whys and hand them the tools of understanding what our journey is, and again, I feel like the long armor versus and quilter, the piecer relationship is a very sacred, treasured, respected relationship. So build that relationship is my big take on all of what we just talked about. Again, is just building a relationship with your long armor and having that conversation with them, because they're all working hard for you to make something beautiful. And I look at long arming as to enhance the piecing, not take away from the piecing. So Tracy, you want to end us out with all of the good stuff we need to end with?
Pardon?
With the thumbs up, the subscribe. Tell me if I'm missing anything. Please give us a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the
Thumbs
channel.
up are free. Subscribing is free. Comment below. Give us some feedback. Tell us your experiences. Or did you become a better piecer once you got your long arm? I'll bet you did. Oh, we lost Kathy. There we go.
Sorry.
Lights went down in Nebraska.
No, we put automatic lights on some parts of our store, so we didn't have to. So I didn't have to constantly be the mom and say, "Turn off the lights."
Okay, that's all right.
So that's what happened. That's why I can't do the clap on, clap off like we used to for lights.
Mhm.
I'm dating myself. I just dated myself.
No, it's okay. I use I'm going to say the word and it's something going to talk to me, but the A app. So mine are all smart switches and stuff in my showroom. So when we leave the showroom, we can tell the showroom good night and it shuts everything off.
That's amazing.
But it also means that if it's not shut off, I can shut it off at home. I have it timed so that like if at 8 o'clock it all goes off because there's nobody in my showroom at 8 o'clock.
That's when my bunny buster goes, 8 o'clock.
Yeah. I love the fact that Bunny Buster was petting fabric. I mean, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Bunny buster.
Yeah. Mine seems to like thread a lot, which also is perfect. Which is
Tracy, you gotta get on the bandwagon.
she's like,
I had one. It didn't work out.
it didn't work for her well.
No.
That relationship ended.
We broke up. I broke up with it.
Yeah. It ate the wrong thing, probably.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that happening.
Well, it's me. So
Well, it's been great time spending with you ladies.
you too. Everybody have a great week.
You as well.
All righty.
Right.
See everybody soon on the downside, right?
Yep.
Happy quilting.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.